She was 22 years old, 115 pounds, and every senior officer in that auditorium had already decided she did not belong there. They whispered it in the third row. They said it with their eyes when she walked across the stage. She heard every word. She did not flinch. She did not react. Because she was carrying something none of them knew about. Something she had been carrying for 14 months inside her body. 3 pieces of shrapnel. Still there. Still burning. And when the truth finally came out, it did not come with an explanation. It came with her shirt lifted and her ribs exposed, and a silence so absolute that even the Admiral forgot how to breathe. If this story hits you the way it hits me, subscribe to the channel right now and leave a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let us go back to the beginning. The auditorium at Naval Station Norfolk was the kind of room that punished weakness by existing. 300 officers in dress whites and navy blues sat in formation, shoulders squared, chins level. The collective discipline of careers measured in sacrifice and classified paperwork. The air smelled like starch and ceremony. Every brass button caught the overhead light like something that wanted to be noticed. Lieutenant Maya Calloway did not want to be noticed. She sat in the 4th row with her hands pressing flat against her thighs, and her dark brown hair pulled into a regulation bun so tight it could have been part of her skull. Her dress blues were immaculate. Her posture was perfect. From 6 feet away, she looked like every other decorated operator in the room. From 6 inches away, if you knew what you were looking for, she looked like someone who had been awake for 3 days and was choosing not to let it show. She was 22 years old. She was about to receive the Silver Star. And she had spent the last 14 months trying to refuse it. The whispers started before she reached her seat. A senior chief 2 rows back, voice dropped just enough to feel private and just loud enough to carry. "That is the one? She looks like she weighs nothing." The man beside him did not lower his voice at all. Probably some desk operation. You know how these nominations go now. A third voice from the row directly behind her. "No way she saw real combat. Look at her." Maya heard every word. She pressed her hands harder against her thighs and fixed her eyes on the empty stage and did not react. Not because she did not feel it, because she had learned a long time ago that the men who underestimated her were always more useful when they kept doing it. Admiral Duncan Hargrove stood at the front of the room and watched her from the moment she walked in. He was 66, a face weathered by ocean and command, and the particular kind of exhaustion that came from outliving people you were responsible for. 4 rows of ribbons on his chest, a reputation that did not need introduction. He had delivered eulogies for sailors who should have come home, and signed papers for operations that would never be declassified, and somewhere along the way had developed the ability to read a room full of warriors with the precision of a man who had learned that what people showed you was almost never the whole truth. Something about Maya Calloway stopped him. It was her posture. Not incorrect. Too correct. The kind of rigid, absolute physical control that did not come from pride or discipline alone. It came from pain. He had seen it before. A young ensign in Desert Storm who stood at attention during a medal ceremony 3 weeks after taking shrapnel to his spine, never flinched once, and collapsed the moment he stepped off the stage. Hargrove had been the one to catch him. He watched Maya the same way now, watching for the moment the mask slipped. The national anthem played. Everyone stood. Maya rose with them, and Hargrove caught the half-second delay in her movement, the almost imperceptible shift of her weight to her right side, the brief tightening around her eyes that vanished so fast he might have imagined it if he had not been specifically looking. Then she was upright and still and unreachable again, staring forward, pressing herself into the performance of being fine. A Navy captain read from the citation. The language was careful and sanitized, the way official language always was. Words like extraordinary valor and selfless courage moved through the air like they meant something. The citation mentioned Operation Black Mirror in general terms. It mentioned Zabul Province, October 2021. It mentioned a high-risk extraction under sustained enemy fire. It mentioned teammates rescued. It did not mention the dead. It did not mention what Maya Calloway knew that the men who sent her did not bother to tell her. And it did not mention the 3 metal fragments currently living inside her body, approximately 2 centimeters from her heart. Her name was called. She stood. The room applauded. She walked to the stage with the mechanical precision of someone executing a memorized sequence, rather than experiencing a moment. Left foot, right foot, up the steps, across the stage, each movement measured and contained. Hargrove moved to meet her at center stage. Up close, the picture changed. The hollow beneath her cheekbones, the shadows under her eyes that the overhead light made worse instead of better. The way her uniform jacket fit like it had been tailored for someone 5 pounds heavier than the person currently wearing it. Their eyes met. Hers were gray, pale, and steady, the color of morning fog over open water. And what Hargrove saw in them was not fear or pride or the 1,000-yard stare he had learned to recognize in sailors who had been broken by what they witnessed. What he saw was exhaustion. The bone-deep, total exhaustion of a person who had been carrying an impossible weight alone for a very long time, and had stopped believing anyone would help her set it down. She saluted. Crisp, precise, textbook. He returned it and extended his hand. She took it. Strong grip, calloused from the range and the field and the edges of helicopter doors. But there was a tremor in it. Faint, almost undetectable. The involuntary kind that came from nerve involvement or chronic pain that had gone unacknowledged too long. He pinned the silver star to her jacket. She stood perfectly still, shallow breathing, eyes forward. The audience rose for a standing ovation, 300 officers on their feet, and she absorbed it like someone absorbing weather. Present, but not moved. He leaned slightly toward her, voice low enough that only she could hear. "Congratulations, Lieutenant." "Thank you, sir." Automatic. Empty. The words of a person executing a required response. He wanted to say more. He wanted to pull her aside right there and demand to know what she was carrying. But ceremony was ceremony, and the machine of military tradition did not pause for individual truth. She stepped back, saluted, walked off the stage. The applause followed her to her seat, and then the room moved on to the next name, the next medal, the next performance of honor. Hargrove did not watch the next recipient. He watched Maya Calloway sit back down in the 4th row, press her hands flat against her thighs again, and stare at nothing with the stillness of someone attending their own funeral. He had read her file. He had read it twice, in fact, the night before the ceremony, when her name crossed his desk with a flag attached, noting that she had initially refused the nomination. The file was impressive in the way that files could be impressive, while leaving out everything that actually mattered. Top of her Bud/S class. Expert marksman. Fluent in Pashto and Dari. 2 combat tours before the age of 22. 13 confirmed engagements. 3 letters of commendation from officers whose opinions Hargrove trusted. The file said nothing about why she had refused the medal for 14 months. The file said nothing about a handwritten note she had sent back to command via certified mail that read simply, I cannot accept recognition for a mission built on the deaths of people I was responsible for. Command had buried that detail. They had worked on her for over a year, cited duty, cited tradition, cited the importance of female representation in special operations. Eventually, she had agreed to appear today. But Hargrove had not believed for one moment that she had changed her mind. He believed she had run out of strength to fight them on it. And that was a very different thing. The ceremony ended. The room dissolved into the professional pleasantries and family photographs that followed these events. Officers shaking hands and saying nothing meaningful. Reporters waiting at the edges for a soundbite. Families clustered around their decorated sons and daughters, with pride shining in every direction. Maya stood alone near the side exit. A few officers approached to offer congratulations. She thanked each one with the same flat courtesy she had given Hargrove on stage. They did not stay long. There was something in her stillness that made conversation feel unwelcome. Something that communicated clearly. I am present, but I am not available. And if you push, something is going to break. Hargrove crossed the room toward her. She straightened reflexively as he approached, coming to attention without thinking about it. "Lieutenant Calloway." Not a question, a statement. She saluted. He returned it, then tilted his head toward the corridor behind her. "Walk with me." Something moved across her face, just for a moment. Calculation. The quick assessment of whether this was a request she could decline or an order she could not. Then it settled back into compliance. "Yes, sir." They walked in silence. The corridor stretched long ahead of them, portraits on both sides, faces from other decades, men whose wars were finished and whose names were on plaques now. The sound of the ceremony faded behind them. Their footsteps echoed. Nobody else was in the hall. Hargrove stopped in front of a portrait of a submarine commander who had spent 14 months beneath the Arctic ice during the Cold War, doing things that could not be acknowledged. "You refused this medal for 14 months, he said. Conversational, like noting the weather. Maya's posture stayed rigid. "I did, sir." "Why accept it now?" She did not answer immediately. Her eyes moved to the portraits. Face to face, young men made permanent in oil paint and brass. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than it had been. Tired in a way that no amount of sleep would fix. "I thought no one cared enough to actually ask." Hargrove turned to face her fully. She was not small the way the men in that auditorium seemed to think she was. She stood straight, and she occupied her space with the precision of someone trained to know exactly where every part of her body was at all times. But in that moment, in the empty corridor, something about her looked diminished, like a person who had been compressed by a weight she was not meant to carry alone. "Tell me," he said. "The mission we were sent on, sir." She paused. Her jaw tightened. "The man we were sent to rescue. CIA Field Officer Nolan Briggs." Another pause. Longer. "He was already dead when we deployed." The silence that followed was the kind that changed the temperature of a room. Hargrove kept his voice level. "Explain that." "We hit the ground at 02:30 on October 15th. Intel said 8 to 12 hostiles. Minimal resistance. 20 minutes on target. We walked into 43 fighters with pre-positioned RPGs, automatic weapons, coordinated overlapping fields of fire, and a GPS beacon transmitting Briggs's signal from a radio on loop." Her voice did not shake. It had the controlled flatness of someone reciting facts, because the alternative to facts was falling apart. There was no person at those coordinates. There was never going to be a person at those coordinates. Someone knew exactly where we were landing. And that ambush was not built in 20 minutes. Who died? The question landed, and Maya absorbed it the way she absorbed everything else, without visible reaction, without looking away. Corporal Jesse Tran, 21 years old. She stopped, swallowed. Petty Officer Camille Rhodes, 24. She was 8 weeks from her wedding. Another stop, this one longer. Staff Sergeant Dara Okafor, 27. She was my closest friend. Hargrove did not speak. Sometimes the right thing was silence. Dara took a round through her abdomen at the 4-hour mark, Maya said. She died in Germany 3 days after the mission. I was with her. A pause that stretched almost past the point of bearing. Her last words were asking me to call her younger sister. The corridor was very quiet. 7 months after the mission, Maya said, reaching into her jacket, someone sent me this. She produced a folded document. No envelope. Just the paper, worn at the creases from being opened and refolded too many times. She held it out. Hargrove took it. CIA. Medical Examiner Documentation. Nolan Briggs. Date of death, October 3rd, 2021. Cause, execution-style gunshot wound to the head. Estimated time of death, 12 to 14 days prior to body recovery. Hargrove read it once. Read it again. His hands, steady through 42 years of service that included 2 ground wars and 14 classified operations, were not entirely steady now. 12 days, he said. We deployed on October 15th, sir. He looked up from the paper. Who sent you this? Anonymous. Unmarked envelope. No return address. She held his gaze. But whoever it was, they knew what happened, and they wanted me to know that someone else knew the truth. Why didn't you report this? The laugh she made was brief and without any humor in it. To who, sir? The command structure that authorized the mission? The officers who buried my debrief and fast-tracked a medal nomination 3 weeks later? She shook her head. I am a lieutenant. I had 2 choices. Accept the medal, stay quiet, stay in the Navy. Or speak up, get labeled unstable and insubordinate, and spend the rest of my short career being managed into retirement. She paused. I chose to survive. Until today. What changed? Maya looked at him for a long moment. Something in her expression shifted. The mask did not come down entirely, but a crack formed in it. When you pinned that medal on me, she said quietly, you looked at me like you actually saw something. Not a file, not a nomination. Me. She stopped. I have been carrying this alone for 14 months, Admiral. I am so tired of carrying it alone that I am willing to bet everything on the chance that you are actually the person I think you are. Hargrove studied her for a long time. The portraits on the walls watched them from both sides. Show me, he said. Whatever it is you have been carrying, show me all of it. Maya looked down the corridor, empty in both directions. No witnesses, no cameras. Then she looked back at him, and what crossed her face in that moment was not relief, and it was not hope. It was the particular expression of a person who has been drowning for so long they can no longer remember what it felt like to breathe, deciding to trust the current one more time. Not here, she said. Come with me. She led him to a soundproofed briefing room at the end of the corridor and closed the door behind them. The latch clicked like a period at the end of a sentence that had been building for 14 months. Maya stood at the far end of the table with her back to him, both hands resting on the edge, her weight distributed the way operators learned to distribute it when they needed their body to hold them up without looking like it was doing that. Her breathing was slow and deliberate, controlled, The kind of breathing you practiced until it became automatic, because the alternative was losing control in front of people you could not afford to lose control in front of. Hargrove waited. He had debriefed traumatized sailors before. He knew the difference between silence that needed to be filled and silence that needed to be honored. "I have not been in a room like this," she said, still facing away, "since my debrief. October 2021. 3 officers asked me 4 questions. Wrote down my answers. Left. That was it." She stopped. No follow-up. No investigation. No explanation for why the intelligence failed. Just a file marked classified and a medal nomination I never asked for. "What should they have asked you?" She turned around. Her face was pale, but her eyes were direct. Who authorized the mission? Why the intelligence was marked reliable when 3 separate analysts had flagged it as unverified? And how Nolan Briggs could have been dead for 12 days while we were still being briefed on extracting him alive. Hargrove pulled out a chair and sat down, not because he needed to, because he wanted her to feel like the room had shifted in her direction. "Tell me about the night." She told him. She started at 2300 hours on October 14th, when the mission orders came through. 6-person element. Extract Briggs from a compound in Zabul province. Intel said 8 to 12 fighters. Low-threat environment. In and out in 20 minutes. She had looked at the brief and felt something she could not name. Not doubt exactly. More like the particular instinct that develops after enough missions to know when a picture is too clean. She pushed it down. She trusted the intelligence because that was what you did when you trusted your chain of command. She stopped trusting her chain of command at 0231 on October 15th, 90 seconds after her team hit the ground. "They were waiting for us," she said. "Not positioned defensively. Waiting. 43 fighters with overlapping fields of fire, and RPG teams already sighted on our insertion point." Her voice stayed level, but something beneath it was pulling tight. "That kind of setup takes days. You do not position 43 people with coordinated fire plans in 20 minutes. Somebody told them we were coming. Somebody told them exactly where we would land." Hargrove leaned forward. "Jesse Tran." The name landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. "He was on my left," Maya said. "The sniper round came from the north ridgeline. He was gone before he hit the ground." She stopped. "He had asked me right before we boarded the helicopter if the fear ever went away. I told him it did not, but it got quieter. I told him that was enough." She looked at the table for a moment. "He never got a chance to find out if I was right." "Keep going." Camille Rhodes took shrapnel to her left arm at the 4-minute mark. Brachial artery. Our medic, Sergeant Pierce, tried to stabilize her while Dara and I held the perimeter, but the volume of fire was too concentrated to work in. We had to move. Maya's hands pressed flat against the table. We reached the GPS coordinates at 0310. No person, a field radio, broadcasting Briggs's signal on a continuous loop. She looked up. That was when I understood. We were not a rescue mission. We were something else. I just did not know yet what. "What did you do?" "I ordered Pierce to get Rhodes and Dara to the extraction point. Senior Chief Marcus Stone was pinned down by a sniper approximately 200 meters east. I stayed to cover him." Hargrove was quiet for a moment. "Alone?" "Yes, sir." "Against 40 fighters?" "That is correct." "For how long?" "Approximately 90 minutes." She said it the way you said something that sounded impossible, and had happened anyway. "I expended 8 magazines. Took a grazing wound to the left shoulder at the 1-hour mark. Kept moving. A pause. At 05:20, an RPG impacted my position. I was thrown approximately 12 feet. 4 fractured ribs, punctured left lung, multiple shrapnel wounds. She touched her left side without thinking about it. The gesture so automatic, she probably did not know she was doing it. I got back up, got stoned to the extraction point. We were the last 2 on the helicopter. The room was very quiet. "Dara Okafor," Hargrove said. Maya's expression did not change, but something behind it did. She took a round through her abdomen at 04:15. We got her out. She made it to Germany. A pause that stretched. She died 3 days later. I was with her. Another pause, longer. She asked me to call her younger sister. Tell her she was loved. Maya's jaw tightened until the muscle along it stood visible. That was the last thing she said. Hargrove sat with that for a moment. Then he spoke carefully. "You said you received documentation 7 months after the mission." "Yes, sir." Maya reached into her jacket again and produced a second document. This one, a financial disclosure filed under a shell corporation registered in Delaware. She set it on the table. 3 months before our mission, the officer who authorized it received a payment of $210,000 from a consulting firm called Vantage Precision Group. Hargrove picked up the document. "I know this name." "You should. Vantage is a subsidiary of Arctis Systems." She watched his face. "Defense contractor, specializing in autonomous battlefield surveillance, AI-guided targeting platforms, predictive behavior modeling for real-time combat environments." Hargrove set the document down slowly. They needed field data. They needed to know if their system worked against real operators under real fire. Controlled test environments cannot replicate genuine combat stress responses. You need real targets, real variables, real decisions made under genuine threat of death. Her voice was steady, and the steadiness of it was somehow worse than if it had not been. My team's movements were being tracked in real time by Arctis surveillance drones throughout the entire engagement. Our tactics, our spacing, our responses to incoming fire, our decision-making under sustained contact. All of it recorded and transmitted live to a civilian server. She stopped. We were not a rescue mission. We were a field trial. Hargrove stood. He walked to the far wall and stood there with his back to her for a moment. And Maya watched him with the patience of someone who had waited 14 months and could wait a little longer. When he turned around, his face had changed. The careful, measured expression he had brought into the room was gone. What replaced it was the face of a man who had spent 42 years serving, under the assumption that the institution he served was imperfect, but not corrupt, and who was now recalibrating everything. "Who authorized the mission?" he said. Not a question. Maya reached into her jacket one final time and placed the last document on the table. A name, a rank, a title. Commander Elliot Farrow, Navy Intelligence Liaison, Joint Special Activities Coordination Center. She met his eyes without blinking. He received the CIA mortality report on Nolan Briggs at 1400 hours on October 15th. The mission brief was issued at 2000 hours the same evening. She paused. 6 hours. He had 6 hours between knowing Briggs was dead and ordering us into that compound anyway. The air in the room shifted. "Where is Farrow now?" Hargrove's voice came out quiet. The particular quiet of controlled fury. Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence. The Pentagon. Maya's voice did not change. He was promoted 4 months after our mission. Hargrove looked at the documents on the table. Then he looked at her, and she held his gaze the way she had held every other impossible thing in her life, with her feet planted and her hands steady and the 3 pieces of metal in her chest, burning the way they always burned when the temperature dropped, or the pressure changed, or she was standing in a room where the truth was finally being spoken out loud. "There is more," she said. "Show me." She told him about the flash drive. A former CIA analyst named Lena Park, part of the original mission planning team for Operation Black Mirror, who had resigned 6 months after the ambush and walked out of the agency carrying everything she had seen on a drive she was too afraid to use and too guilty to destroy. 2 years of communications, financial records, mission briefs, drone flight logs, planning documents. Not just 1 mission. 3. Somalia in 2020, Djibouti in early 2021, Zabul Province in October of the same year. The same pattern every time. Questionable intelligence, light resistance promised, overwhelming force delivered. Arctic surveillance assets in the area, multiple casualties. And in every case, the officers who authorized the deployments received financial compensation routed through shell companies connected to Arctic Systems or its subsidiaries. 7 Americans dead before Maya's team ever boarded the helicopter. 10 total, counting Tran and Rhodes and Okafor. And planning documents for 11 more. Hargrove sat back down. He pulled the financial disclosure toward him and looked at it for a long time without speaking. When he finally looked up, his eyes were the eyes of a man who is making a decision, not weighing one. "I need to make some calls," he said. "Tonight. People I trust. People who have the access to verify what you have shown me." He paused. "I want you to write down everything you remember about that night. Every detail. Times, coordinates, radio traffic, anything that contradicts the official record." He looked at her steadily. "And Lieutenant, I need you to understand something before we go any further." Maya waited. "This is going to get significantly worse before it gets better. The man you are naming is a deputy director. He has relationships throughout the chain of command, access to information about this investigation the moment it becomes official, and every incentive in the world to make you the problem instead of the corruption you are exposing." Hargrove's voice was direct but not unkind. "They will go after your credibility, your mental health evaluations, your service record. They will suggest your trauma distorted your perception. They will make this about you." Maya looked at him for a moment. Then she reached up and touched her left side, lightly, through the fabric of her jacket. Just her fingertips, just briefly. "Sir?" she said quietly. "I've been breathing around 3 pieces of shrapnel for 14 months because removing them carries a 38% chance of killing me. I think I can handle some bureaucrats questioning my credibility." Hargrove looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and removed a card with his personal cell number and set it on the table between them. "Tomorrow, 800, my office." He held her gaze. "We are going to find out exactly what happened to your team. And then, we are going to make sure it never happens to anyone else." Maya picked up the card, and for the first time since Admiral Hargrove had watched her walk across his stage that morning, something changed in her face. Not hope, not relief. Something quieter than both of those. The first faint possibility that she had not been wrong to walk into that corridor. That she had not been wrong to trust him. "Yes, sir," she said. Hargrove made 7 calls that night. He did not sleep. By 300, he had confirmed 3 things. The first was that Lena Park was real, traceable, and had resigned from the CIA without disciplinary action on April 14, 2022, exactly 6 months after Operation Black Mirror. The second was that Vantage Precision Group had dissolved as a registered entity 4 weeks after Maya's mission, its assets quietly absorbed into a holding company 2 layers removed from Arctis Systems. The third was that Commander Elliot Farrow had been promoted to Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence on February 3, 2022, 16 weeks after he sent 6 people into a compound in Zabul Province to extract a man who had already been dead for 12 days. The promotion paperwork had been signed by a 2-star admiral named Gerald Cass. Hargrove knew Gerald Cass, had known him for 20 years, had served beside him in the Gulf, and trusted his judgment on 2 continents. He sat with that information for a long time before he wrote it down. At 7:45 the next morning, Maya was in his office before he arrived. She was sitting in the chair across from his desk, with her back straight and a legal pad on her knee covered in dense, precise handwriting. 14 pages. She had written through the night. Every coordinate she remembered from the insertion, every radio exchange, every minute of the engagement she could reconstruct with certainty, and every gap she was honest enough to mark as approximate. The document was methodical and devastating, and read like what it was: the account of an operator who had spent 14 months organizing her memories because she had always known the day would come when they would need to be evidence. Hargrove read it standing up. He did not sit down until page 9. When he finished, he set the pad on the desk and looked at her. This contradicts the official after-action report at 11 separate points. Yes, sir. The official report says resistance was heavier than anticipated, but consistent with intelligence failures common in that operational environment. The official report was written by officers who were not there. I know. He opened his laptop. I spent last night pulling everything I could access on Operation Black Mirror. I found something you need to see. He turned the screen toward her. A communication log, time-stamped October 15th, 2021, 1400 hours. An internal CIA transmission, marked for distribution to Navy Intelligence Liaison personnel. The subject line read, Briggs, Nolan, status update. Confirmed KIA. The body of the message was 4 sentences. Body recovered. Identity confirmed by dental records. Date of death estimated October 3rd. Case closed pending family notification. The distribution list at the bottom included one name highlighted in red. Farrow, E. Navy Intel Liaison. Received. 1400 hours. Maya stared at the screen. She had known this. She had known it from the moment Lena Park's anonymous envelope arrived at her apartment. But seeing it on official letterhead, time-stamped, documented, distributed through proper channels to the man who, 6 hours later, authorized her team's deployment, turned knowledge into something physical. Her jaw tightened. Her hands pressed flat against her knees. He is going to say he did not read it in time, she said. His defense attorney is going to say exactly that. Hargrove closed the laptop. Which is why we need more than a distribution list. He checked his watch. Colonel Petra Voss arrives in 40 minutes. JAG Corps. 30 years of military law. If there is a path through this that ends with Farrow in a courtroom, she will find it. And if there is not? Hargrove met her eyes. Then we find a different path. Colonel Petra Voss arrived at 0900 and shook Maya's hand with a grip that communicated immediately that she did not have time for anything except the truth. She was 57, steel-haired, with the kind of face that had stopped being readable to people who tried to read it sometime around her 20th year of service. She sat down, opened her briefcase, and looked at the documents on Hargrove's desk. "Walk me through it," she said. "All of it. Start from the mission brief." Maya walked her through it. Every piece of documentation, the autopsy, the financial disclosure, the communication log, the drone flight record she'd received from Lena Park. Voss listened without interrupting, making notes in a leather journal with a pen that moved fast and did not stop. When Maya finished, Voss sat back and looked at Hargrove. "It is actionable," she said. "Conspiracy, fraud, negligent homicide on 3 counts, minimum." She paused. "But a good defense attorney will argue incompetence over intent. Communication breakdown, the fog of war. They will say Pharaoh made a catastrophic mistake, not a deliberate one." "3 people died," Maya said. "I know, and the law requires more than moral certainty. It requires evidence of criminal intent." Voss tapped her pen against the journal. "We need testimony from someone inside the planning process. Someone who can confirm that the decision to proceed was deliberate, not accidental." Hargrove looked at Maya. Maya already knew the answer. "Lena Park," she said. Getting to Lena Park took 3 days, 2 intermediaries, and a conversation conducted in a coffee shop in Arlington that Park had almost canceled 4 times before she walked through the door. She looked like a woman who had been carrying something too heavy for too long and had gotten used to the weight without ever getting comfortable with it. She was 43, though she looked older, with dark circles under her eyes and hands that trembled slightly when she picked up her cup. She sat with her back to the wall and tracked every person who came through the door, and did not relax once during the entire conversation. "You almost did not come," Maya said. "I almost did not." Park looked at her coffee. "I told myself I was done with all of it, that resigning was enough, that walking away made me something other than complicit." She stopped. "It did not. Tell me what you saw from the inside." Park set down her cup. "I was part of the analytical team for Operation Black Mirror's intelligence package. I flagged Briggs's status the moment his KIA report came through. Sent it up the chain immediately." She paused. "My supervisor called me back within the hour. Told me to remove the flag. Said the mission was proceeding and my job was to support the operational picture, not complicate it." Maya kept her voice level. "You pushed back." "I asked him directly if the team deploying that night knew their asset was dead." Park's hands tightened around her cup. "He told me that was above my clearance level. Then he reminded me about my pension, my daughter's college fund. Everything I had spent 20 years building." She looked up. "So I stopped pushing. And the next morning, I pulled up the casualty report and saw 3 names." Her voice dropped. "I have not slept more than 4 hours straight since then." "You sent me the autopsy." 6 months after the mission. Anonymous. Untraceable." Park nodded. "I thought if someone who was actually there knew the truth, they would do something about it. But nothing happened. The Navy gave you a medal and declared the investigation closed, and I figured that was the end of it." "It is not the end." Park looked at her steadily. "If I testify, they will come after everything. My clearance, my reputation, my pension. They will find a reason." Maya leaned forward. "Dara Okafor was 27 years old. She died in a hospital in Germany asking me to call her younger sister." She held Park's gaze without blinking. "Jesse Tran was 21. He asked me if the fear ever went away. He was dead 30 seconds later." She stopped. "Staying silent has a cost too. You know that better than anyone in this room." Park was quiet for a long time. Then she reached into her jacket and set a flash drive on the table between them. Small and black and unremarkable. "I copied everything before I resigned. she said quietly. 2 years of communications, financial records, mission briefs, drone logs, all of it. She looked at Maya. There is something else on there that I did not tell you about. Something I did not include in the autopsy envelope because I was not sure anyone would believe me. Maya picked up the drive. Tell me now. Pharaoh was not working alone. There were 4 officers total. Navy, CIA, 1 from JSOC. Park's voice dropped. They were part of a joint initiative called Project Coldfront, a partnership between the Defense Department and Arctis Systems to develop autonomous combat support AI. Your mission was not the first test. She stopped, looked at the table. Somalia, 2020. Djibouti, early 2021. Same pattern every time. Questionable intelligence. Overwhelming resistance. Arctis drones in the area recording everything. Multiple casualties. She looked up. 7 Americans dead before your team ever deployed. The number hit Maya like a physical weight. She absorbed it without moving. And there are planning documents on that drive, Park continued, for 11 more test missions. I do not know if they are still active, but if they are running, more people are going to die. That night, Hargrove's office, the flash drive on the desk. Voss, standing by the window with her arms crossed, and the particular expression of a person processing information that is significantly worse than they anticipated. They had spent 3 hours going through Park's files, and the picture that emerged was not the story of one corrupt officer making a calculated decision for financial gain. It was a system. 3 years, 4 officers, 11 planned operations, over $1.3 million routed through shell companies to men who wore the same uniform as the people they were killing. This is not one bad actor, Hargrove said. His voice was quiet, in the way that quiet was not calm. This is institutional. They turned combat deployments into product demonstrations, and they kept going because nobody stopped them. Voss set down the document she was holding. These financial records are enough for conspiracy charges. The mission briefs combined with Park's testimony establish intent. The drone logs prove Arctis was operating surveillance assets over your team in real time. She looked at Maya. We can build this case, but there is a problem. Cass, Hargrove said. Voss nodded once. Admiral Gerald Cass is named in 3 of these communications. He signed Pharaoh's promotion. He sits on the oversight board for joint special activities. She looked at Hargrove directly. The moment this becomes a formal investigation through official channels, Cass will know within the hour. He will have time to coordinate, destroy, and disappear anything that is not already in this room. The silence stretched. Maya had been listening without speaking for the last 20 minutes. She spoke now, quietly, and the quietness of it made both of them look at her. So we do not go through official channels first. Voss and Hargrove exchanged a look that communicated 20 years of understanding how institutions protected themselves from the truth. We go public, Voss said. Not through the Navy, through the press. Give everything to a journalist with a platform and the credibility to break this so large and so fast that they cannot contain it. Once it is in the public eye, they will have no choice but to investigate transparently. Maya understood immediately. You want me to talk to the media. I want you to tell your story, Voss said. Everything. The mission, the ambush, the documentation, the scars. She held Maya's gaze. Make it impossible to look away. Hargrove's voice was gentle, but did not soften what he was about to say. This will end your military career, Lieutenant. The Navy does not reward people who do this, even when they are right. Especially when they are right. Maya looked at him for a moment. Then she reached up and pressed her fingertips lightly against her left ribs, a gesture so automatic she probably did not know she was doing it anymore. "My career ended," she said, "the night an RPG fragmentation round put 3 pieces of metal into my chest that cannot be removed without a 38% chance of killing me." She dropped her hand. "I am just making it official." Hargrove held her gaze for a long moment. Something moved across his face. Respect, maybe, or the particular recognition of someone who had been waiting a long time to meet a person willing to pay the full price of telling the truth. "Then we get to work," he said. 48 hours later, Maya Calloway sat in a television studio across from journalist Rachel Thorne, cameras rolling, the silver star on her chest, and 14 months of silence ending in real time. Thorne was 54, 2 Peabody Awards, a reputation for asking the questions that powerful people prayed she would not think to ask. She looked at Maya the way good journalists looked at a source they recognized as credible and costly and irreplaceable. "Lieutenant Calloway," she said, "you were awarded the Silver Star for your actions during Operation Black Mirror. You refused that award for 14 months. Why?" Maya looked directly into the camera. "Because I cannot accept recognition for surviving a mission that should never have happened." "What do you mean?" "The man we were sent to rescue was already dead. CIA Field Officer Nolan Briggs was executed on October 3, 2021. My team deployed on October 15th. Someone in my chain of command received confirmation of his death 6 hours before authorizing our deployment. He sent us anyway." Thorne leaned forward. "That is an extraordinary claim. Do you have documentation?" Maya reached into her jacket and produced the CIA Medical Examiner's report. "Date of death, October 3rd. My team deployed October 15th. She held it up. "The math is not complicated." "Why would anyone authorize a rescue mission for a man already dead?" "Because the mission was never a rescue." Maya's voice stayed even, precise, every word placed where it would land. "Our movements were tracked in real time by surveillance drones operated by a defense contractor called Arctis Systems. Our tactics, our decisions, our responses under sustained fire, all of it recorded and transmitted live to their servers. My team was a field trial for artificial intelligence technology. And when 3 of us died, that was just data." The studio went very quiet. Thorne let the silence breathe for exactly as long as it needed to. Then she asked the question that everything else had been building toward. "Lieutenant, these are serious allegations against named officers in the United States Navy. Are you prepared for the consequences of making them publicly?" Maya stood. She unbuttoned her uniform jacket and set it on the chair behind her. She gripped the hem of her undershirt. She paused for one breath. Then she lifted it, exposing her left side from the waist to just below the arm. And the camera found what was there without being directed. The scarring was extensive, jagged, raised tissue crossing her ribs in patterns that documented the physics of metal moving through a human body. Old scars, white with time. Newer ones still carrying a faint pink. And visible beneath the skin, 3 small, hard, irregular shapes that did not belong and could not be removed, and would remain for the rest of her life, regardless of how long that turned out to be. She lowered her shirt and looked into the camera. "These are the consequences," she said quietly. 3 pieces of an RPG round that tried to kill me and could not be removed without killing me instead. I carry them every day, every breath, every heartbeat." She pointed to each one in turn. "This one is for Corporal Jesse Tran, 21 years old. This one is for Petty Officer Camille Rhodes, 24. She was 8 weeks from her wedding. She stopped. Her voice did not break. It did something harder to watch than breaking. It stayed completely steady. This one is for Staff Sergeant Dara Okafor, 27. My closest friend. She died asking me to call her younger sister. She looked directly at the lens. So yes, I am prepared for the consequences, because the alternative is staying quiet while more people die for someone's profit margin. And I will not do that. I will not. The camera held on her face, and somewhere across the city, in a secure office at the Pentagon, a deputy director of naval intelligence named Elliot Farrow watched the broadcast begin to trend on every platform simultaneously, and understood, for the first time in 14 months, that the thing he had buried was no longer buried. The interview aired on a Tuesday. By Thursday morning, the world had changed. Within 4 hours of broadcast, the clip of Maya lifting her shirt had been viewed 11 million times. By midnight, it was the most shared video on every major platform simultaneously. Veterans groups posted it with their own stories attached. Gold Star families recognized the look on her face, that specific combination of grief and fury and exhaustion, and said so in comment sections that ran to hundreds of thousands of replies. Retired officers went on record calling for immediate investigation. Active duty service members, bound by regulation from speaking publicly, found other ways to signal which side of this they stood on. The Pentagon issued a statement at 0600 Wednesday morning, carefully worded, expressing deep respect for Lieutenant Calloway's service, while noting that the allegations raised serious questions requiring thorough review. By 1400 hours that same day, Commander Elliot Farrow had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. By Friday, 3 additional officers named in Lena Park's documents had been suspended. Arctis Systems stock had fallen 43% in 2 trading sessions. The Senate Armed Services Committee had announced hearings. Maya watched all of it from Hargrove's office, sitting in the same chair she had occupied 4 days earlier, and felt nothing that resembled victory. "This is the part where it gets dangerous," Hargrove told her Wednesday afternoon. "Not the part where they investigate. The part before that, when they are still deciding whether to fight back." She found out what he meant at 2200 hours Thursday night. She came home to find her apartment door standing open, the lock forced cleanly from the frame with a kind of precision that did not come from opportunistic crime. She stopped in the hallway and did a threat assessment before she crossed the threshold, the way she had been trained to do, the way she always did now, in spaces she had left unoccupied. Nothing moved, no sound from inside. She entered. Nothing was missing, not her laptop, not the cash in the kitchen drawer, not any of the things a thief would take. She checked every room with the systematic efficiency of someone who had cleared compounds in 3 countries and knew exactly how long it took to understand whether a space was safe. Then she went to her bedroom and looked at the small display case on her dresser. Empty. She stood very still, looking at that empty case for several seconds. Inside it, she had kept 3 small metal fragments, shrapnel recovered from Dara Okafor's body during the autopsy. She had requested them through official channels, had been given them, had kept them in that case for 14 months as the only physical proof she had that Dara had existed and died and deserved to be remembered by someone who refused to let the truth of her death be buried in a classified file. Gone. Taken by people who understood exactly what they were taking and why. On the kitchen table, she found a single sheet of paper, 8 words in capital letters. No signature, no letterhead. Heroes who ask questions become tragedies. She called Hargrove. He arrived with Colonel Voss and 2 NCIS agents within 40 minutes. They worked the apartment for 2 hours. No prints, no camera footage from the building's system, which had experienced a technical failure between 2030 and 2200 hours. Professional. Careful. Someone with training and resources and a very clear message to deliver. "This is intimidation," Voss said, standing in Maya's kitchen with her arms crossed. "They are showing you they can reach you any time they choose." "I know what it is." Maya's voice was flat. "It will not work." Hargrove pulled her aside while the agents finished. He kept his voice low and direct. "I am assigning you a protective detail. 2 Marines, around the clock. No arguments." "I do not need..." "Yes," he said, "you do. Because you are right, and they know it. And people with power who are cornered do not become rational. They become reckless." He held her gaze. "I have seen good people speak up and end up in accidents that were not accidents. I will not let that happen to you." She wanted to argue. She was trained for this, conditioned for threat environments, capable of defending herself in circumstances that would neutralize most people. But she was also honest enough to know that the thing frightening her right now was not dying. It was dying before the truth finished traveling. Before Tran and Rhodes and Okafor's deaths meant something permanent instead of something that could still be erased. "Protective detail," she said. "Understood." The NCIS agents found nothing useful and left. Voss went to make calls. Hargrove stayed until the Marines arrived and took their positions. Before he left, he stopped at the door and turned back to her. "They took the shrapnel fragments because they want to make you look unstable, like someone who built a shrine to trauma instead of a witness preserving evidence." He paused. "But they made a mistake." Maya looked at him. "You still carry your own shrapnel," he said. 3 pieces that cannot be stolen. 3 pieces that will testify louder than anything they can remove from a display case." She pressed her hand to her ribs after he left, standing in the silence of her apartment with 2 Marines posted outside her door, feeling the familiar dull shift of metal against tissue. Tran, Rhodes, Okafor. They were still with her. They would always be with her, and nobody could take that. The military tribunal convened on a gray morning in August 2022, 7 months after the 60 Minutes broadcast had detonated across every institution that touched the story. The hearing room at Washington Navy Yard was packed beyond any reasonable capacity. Journalists filled the gallery. Cameras lined the back wall. Outside, veterans groups had gathered with photographs of Tran and Rhodes and Okafor held above their heads, and the energy of the crowd pressed against the building like weather. Commander Elliot Farrow sat at the defense table, flanked by 4 attorneys in suits that cost more than Maya's monthly salary. He was 49 and looked older, the months of administrative leave and public scrutiny having carved something visible into his face. But his posture was rigid, and his expression was the expression of a man who still believed this could be managed, that somewhere in the procedure a door would open and he would walk through it. Maya sat at the prosecution table between Colonel Voss and 2 JAG attorneys and looked at him once, directly, when she first took her seat. He did not meet her eyes. She turned away and did not look at him again. The presiding officer was Vice Admiral Thomas Reed, 63, silver-haired, with the reputation of a man who followed the law with the precision of a surgeon and the flexibility of stone. He called the room to order, and the sound collapsed immediately into silence. Colonel Voss delivered the opening statement, standing without notes, her voice carrying to every corner without effort. She laid it out cleanly. Farrow received confirmation of Briggs' death at 1400 hours on October 15, 2021. He authorized the mission at 2000 hours the same evening. 3 Americans died in the resulting ambush. Financial records showed he had received $210,000 from a subsidiary of Arctis Systems 3 months prior. Drone flight logs confirmed Arctis surveillance assets tracked the SEAL team's movements throughout the entire engagement in real time. "This was not a mistake," Voss said, looking directly at the panel of 5 officers who would decide the verdict. "This was a transaction, and 3 American service members were the currency." The defense went next. The lead attorney was a civilian named Douglas Crane, silver-templed, practiced, the kind of man who had stood in rooms like this before and found the exits. He spoke warmly about the fog of war, about the volume of intelligence that crossed a liaison officer's desk on any given operational day, about the tragic inevitability of casualties in complex combat environments. He called Farrow a decorated officer with 22 years of exemplary service, and suggested that the prosecution was asking the panel to criminalize the inherent imperfection of wartime decision-making. He was good. Maya watched the panel while he spoke, and watched them listening, and felt the familiar weight of knowing that truth was not always enough. That truth required architecture and testimony and evidence arranged in the right order by the right people. And that this was why Voss existed, and why Hargrove had spent months building the case file that now occupied 6 bankers' boxes on the prosecution table. Maya was called first. She walked to the witness stand and placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth and the whole truth. And the steadiness in her voice when she did it was not performance. It was 14 months of preparation condensed into a single moment of clarity. This was what all of it had been for. Not the medal, not the interview, not the break-in or the threats or the sleepless nights with metal shifting in her chest. This room, this panel, this oath. Voss walked her through it methodically. The mission brief, the insertion, the ambush, Tran at 0231, Rhodes bleeding out, Okafor taking a round at 0415 and dying in Germany 3 days later. Maya answered every question with the same precision she had brought to every firefight she had survived. No wasted words, no embellishment. The facts arranged in the order they had actually occurred. Then Voss asked her to describe the GPS beacon. "We reached the target coordinates at 0310, Maya said. There was a field radio at the location, broadcasting Briggs's signal on a continuous loop. No person. The asset we had been sent to rescue had never been at those coordinates." She looked at the panel steadily. The mission brief was a fabrication. We were not an extraction team. We were a data collection event. The defense attorney objected. Reed overruled him. Voss let the testimony breathe for exactly 1 beat. Then she asked Maya to stand. The courtroom went very quiet as Maya rose from the witness chair. She unbuttoned her jacket. She lifted her undershirt. The panel looked at the scarring across her ribs. They looked at the 3 shapes visible beneath the skin. They looked at her face, which was composed and direct and did not ask for anything. "Lieutenant Calloway," Voss said quietly, "please describe what the panel is seeing." 3 shrapnel fragments from an RPG round that impacted my position during Operation Black Mirror. They remain embedded approximately 2 centimeters from my cardiac wall. Surgical removal carries a 38% mortality risk. Maya's voice did not waver. "They stay because removing them would likely kill me. I feel them every day, every breath, every cold morning." She lowered her shirt and met the panel's eyes. "That is what the mission cost. Those are the consequences of someone deciding that the lives of American service members were an acceptable expense in a product demonstration." She sat back down. The cross-examination lasted 4 hours. Crane came at her from every angle. He questioned her memory. Implied PTSD had distorted her account. Suggested she had fabricated the conspiracy narrative to give meaning to a tragedy that was simply the result of intelligence failure in a chaotic operational environment. He brought up the refused medal, called it evidence of instability. He asked if she was pursuing a book deal. He suggested her relationship with Admiral Hargrove indicated a coordinated campaign rather than a legitimate whistleblowing effort. Maya answered every question the same way, factually, precisely, without visible anger, which was the hardest part, because the anger was there, had always been there. 3 pieces of metal and 3 names on a loop, and 14 months of silence, all compressed into the space behind her sternum where the shrapnel lived. But anger on a witness stand became a liability, and she had not survived 90 minutes alone against 40 fighters by letting her emotions outrun her discipline. Then Crane played what he believed was his final card. "Lieutenant Calloway, isn't it true that you sought out Admiral Hargrove specifically because of his terminal diagnosis, calculating that a dying man with nothing to lose would make the most useful ally for your campaign?" The courtroom went still. Maya looked at Crane for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was quiet enough that everyone leaned slightly forward to hear it. Admiral Hargrove approached me. I was standing alone near a side exit trying to get out of a ceremony I had been pressured into attending, and he asked me to walk with him. She paused. I told him the truth because he asked for it and looked like he could handle it. I did not calculate anything. I was just tired. Crane sat down. Voss stood for redirect. "Lieutenant, why are you here today?" Maya looked at the panel. Then she looked at the gallery, at the veterans with the photographs, at the families of Tran and Rhodes and Okafor sitting in the front row on the right side, the families she had called personally before the tribunal convened to tell them she was sorry it had taken this long and she was not going to stop until it was finished. "Because silence has a cost," she said, "and I am done paying it." The testimony that followed over the next 3 days was the architecture Voss had been building for 7 months. Lena Park took the stand and spent 6 hours establishing that the decision to proceed with Operation Black Mirror, after receiving Briggs's KIA confirmation, was deliberate and documented. Her voice shook twice during cross-examination and steadied both times. She had brought everything. Every email, every recorded conversation she had preserved before walking out of the CIA for the last time. Every document from the flash drive that had spent 2 years in her jacket pocket, waiting for a room like this one. The drone operator who had tracked Maya's team in real time testified that he had been ordered to transmit the surveillance data to a civilian server and had complied, because he believed it was standard operational procedure. He learned otherwise 6 months later when he saw the Arctis Systems name in a defense contractor news article and recognized the server address from his own transmission logs. He had gone to his commanding officer. His commanding officer had told him to let it go. He had not let it go. He was here. The FBI financial analyst spent 2 days walking the panel through $1.3 million in payments across 3 years. Shell companies layered inside holding companies, layered inside legitimate consulting arrangements. Each layer designed to create distance between the money and the men receiving it. The analyst had spent 4 months unraveling it and presented the result with the calm thoroughness of someone who understood that the numbers, in the end, were the most irrefutable testimony of all. On the 6th day, Admiral Duncan Hargrove took the stand. He was thinner than he had been in March. The cancer was visible now in ways it had not been when Maya first walked into a ceremony. A general hollowing that no amount of bearing could entirely conceal. But when he sat down and looked at the panel, His voice carried the full weight of 42 years of service and not a tremor of apology. Voss approached. "Admiral Hargrove, what prompted you to reopen the investigation into Operation Black Mirror?" "Lieutenant Calloway showed me evidence that the mission had been compromised at the authorization level," he said. "I believed her immediately." "Why?" Hargrove's gaze moved briefly to Maya, then back to the panel. "Because I know what it looks like when someone has been carrying the truth alone for too long and does not believe anyone will help them carry it. I have worn that expression myself. For 28 years after I lost 8 sailors in the Gulf to intelligence I should have questioned harder." He paused. "When I looked at her face during that ceremony, I saw myself. And I decided I was not going to be the next person who walked away." Crane's cross-examination was aggressive and brief. He attacked Hargrove's credibility, suggested the terminal diagnosis had affected his judgment, implied that a dying man seeking a final act of significance was not a reliable investigator. Hargrove looked at him with the patience of a man who had genuinely run out of things to fear. "I have 6 months," he said. "Maybe less. I am not spending them on petty arguments. I am spending them on the truth. Because Lieutenant Calloway deserved someone to fight for it 2 years ago. And since nobody else stepped forward, that is now my job." The deliberation lasted 16 hours. The verdict came at 0900 on a Friday morning, with every seat filled and the weight of the preceding weeks pressing on every person in the room. Reed opened his folder. "The accused will rise." Farrow stood. His lead attorney stood beside him. Whatever calculation Farrow had been running behind his eyes for the past 7 months reached its conclusion in that moment, and what showed on his face was not quite fear and not quite resignation. It was the expression of a man who had spent his entire career believing the institution would protect him, and was now discovering the precise moment at which institutions stopped. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, this tribunal finds the accused guilty. A sound moved through the gallery, not loud, more like a collective exhale that had been held for 14 months. On the charge of negligent homicide, 3 counts, this tribunal finds the accused guilty. In the front row on the right side, Dara Okafor's younger sister pressed both hands over her mouth. On the charge of conduct unbecoming an officer, this tribunal finds the accused guilty. Reed closed the folder. "Commander Elliot Farrow, you are stripped of rank and discharged from the United States Navy with dishonor. You will be remanded to custody pending sentencing. This tribunal recommends 15 years confinement at the United States Disciplinary Barracks, Fort Leavenworth." The gavel came down. Maya sat perfectly still, with her eyes closed and her hands flat on the table, and felt the weight shift in her chest. Not gone. It would never be gone. But different. The shrapnel was still there, 3 pieces of metal that had tried to kill her and failed. And they still burned on cold mornings and shifted when she moved wrong, and would remain inside her body for the rest of her life. But they meant something now. Tran and Rhodes and Okafor meant something now. Their deaths were not data. They were not acceptable losses in someone's product demonstration. They were the reason a deputy director was being handcuffed in a military courtroom, and the reason 3 other officers had already entered plea agreements, and the reason Arctis Systems had declared bankruptcy 6 weeks prior, with its executives facing federal charges of their own. Hargrove placed his hand on her shoulder. She opened her eyes. "You did it," he said. She looked at him, at the face of a man who had spent the last 7 months of his life on this, who was thinner than he had been in March, and would be thinner still by December. who had chosen this over everything else he could have done with the time he had left. "We did it," she said. 3 days after the verdict, Maya drove to Arlington. She had not called ahead. She had not told Hargrove or Voss or anyone else where she was going. She just got in her car at 600 and drove in the gray November quiet, and parked, and walked to the section where the new stone had been placed the previous week. 3 names carved in granite that had not existed in any permanent form until now. Jesse Tran, Camille Rhodes, Dara Okafor. She stood in front of it for a long time without speaking. The shrapnel in her ribs ached in the cold the way it always did. A dull, insistent pressure that she had stopped thinking of as pain and started thinking of as presence. They were with her. They had always been with her. The difference now was that the world knew their names. She had brought the silver star. She unclipped it from her jacket and held it in her palm for a moment, feeling the weight of the bronze, the ribbon between her fingers. Then she placed it carefully at the base of the stone. "You earned this more than I did," she said quietly. "All 3 of you." She stood there until her hands went cold. Then she drove to Walter Reed. Hargrove had been moved to the palliative care wing 2 weeks after the verdict. The cancer had spread faster in the months since the tribunal, as if the body, having accomplished what it needed to, had stopped negotiating. He was awake when she arrived, propped up in the bed, looking out the window with the expression of a man who had made his peace with the view. "You were at Arlington," he said when she walked in. Not a question. "How did you know?" "Because I would have been." He looked at her. "Did it help?" She sat in the chair beside his bed. "I left the medal." He was quiet for a moment. "Good. It belongs there." They sat together in the way they had learned to sit over the past 7 months, without needing to fill the silence with anything that was not necessary. Outside the window, the November sky was the color of old pewter. Inside the room, the only sounds were the ventilation system and the faint rhythm of monitoring equipment and the occasional distant voice from the corridor. 3 more officers entered plea agreements this morning," Maya said. "Voss called me on the way here. Admiral Cass is next. His attorneys are already talking." Hargrove nodded slowly. Cass always knew when a position was untenable. 20 years, and that never changed. He paused. "He will try to minimize his role. Say he signed papers without understanding what he was signing. Say Pharaoh kept him compartmentalized." "Voss says the emails contradict that." "Good." His voice was quieter than it had been in October, but the conviction in it had not diminished at all. "Make sure she presses. Cass in a courtroom is more important than Cass in a plea. The public needs to see the rank of the people involved." "She knows." He turned to look at her. "How are you sleeping?" The question surprised her, not because it was unexpected from him, but because no one else had thought to ask it in 7 months. "Better than I was," she said honestly. "Some nights are still bad, but they are different now. Before the tribunal, the bad nights felt like carrying something that would never go anywhere. Now they feel more like grief." She paused. "Grief is survivable." "Yes," he said, "it is." He looked back at the window. "I want to tell you something I should have said earlier." She waited. "When I watched you walk across that stage in March, I thought I was going to intervene in someone else's crisis. Pull a good officer back from an edge." He stopped, took a slow breath. "I did not understand yet that you were not on an edge. You were standing on solid ground that nobody else could see. You had been standing on it for 14 months, alone." He looked at her. "I did not save you, Lieutenant. You saved yourself long before I showed up. I just helped carry the evidence." Maya looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "You gave me a room where the truth was worth saying. That was not nothing." He smiled. It was the smile of a man who had run out of pretense and found something cleaner on the other side of it. "No," he said, "it was not nothing." She visited every afternoon for the next 3 weeks. She read to him sometimes, Hemingway mostly, the sparse declarative sentences that did not waste words on anything that was not load-bearing. Sometimes she brought updates on the investigation, the ongoing congressional hearings, the federal charges accumulating against Arctis executives, the policy working groups that had started convening under the name the Hargrove Protocols before he was even out of the tribunal room. He listened to all of it with his eyes closed and his breathing slow, and the expression of a man for whom the outcome had become more important than his presence in it. On the last afternoon, he asked her about the flash drive, whether Park's documents had been fully entered into the congressional record. She told him yes, all of it. Every page, every transaction, every communication that proved the pattern stretched back 3 years and across 3 continents, and 10 American deaths. "And the 11 planned missions?" he asked. "Cancelled. Arctis lost its DoD contracts the week after the broadcast. Without the funding and the access, there is nothing left to run." She paused. Voss believes there were 2 additional contractors operating similar arrangements with different military branches. The FBI is investigating both. He opened his eyes. "Who is leading that investigation?" "A woman named Carla Diaz, assistant director. She called me last week, asked if I would consult." Maya looked at him steadily. "I said yes." Something moved across his face, not pride exactly, something quieter and more durable than pride. "Good," he said. "Keep going." He died at 4:12 on a Tuesday morning in December. Maya was holding his hand. The room was very still. His last words came out barely above a breath, and she had to lean close to hear them. "Tell them the truth mattered." "I will," she said. "I promise." She kept the promise 3 days later at Arlington, standing at the podium in her dress blues, with the silver star back on her chest, returned to her by the cemetery groundskeeper who had found it at the base of the granite stone, and recognized from the news coverage whose medal it was. She had put it back on that morning without entirely understanding why, and then she had understood. Because Hargrove had earned it as much as she had. Because the fight that produced it belonged to both of them now, and to Tran and Rhodes and Okafor and all the others whose names had been added to the record. Because some things were not about individual ownership. Some things were about what you carried forward. The eulogy she delivered was not long. Hargrove would not have wanted long. He would have wanted precise. Admiral Hargrove had 6 months to live when he chose this fight, she said, her voice carrying across the gathered uniforms and civilian coats and the cold December air. He could have spent that time anywhere else, with his family, traveling, doing the things that dying men are supposed to do when they finally have permission to stop working. She paused. Instead, he spent it in briefing rooms and JAG offices and courtrooms and a hospital bed where he kept asking me for updates on federal investigations at 6 in the morning. She heard something move through the crowd, not quite laughter, the sound of recognition. He taught me that courage is not charging into a firefight. Every operator in this field can do that. Courage is standing up in a room full of people who have decided the truth is inconvenient and saying it anyway, clearly, on the record, with your name attached. She looked at the flag-draped coffin. "Admiral, you said you wanted to earn your legacy. You did. We are going to carry it forward. After the service, as the crowd began to move in the way crowds moved at Arlington, quietly and with the particular gravity of people who had stood in this place before and knew what it asked of them, 14 people approached her. Active duty, Army, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force. Young faces with old eyes. The specific combination that came from seeing things that could not be unseen and knowing things that could not be unknown. A Marine captain spoke first. She was maybe 26, with the bearing of someone who had been in difficult places and come back changed by them in ways she was still mapping. "Ma'am, we have been watching what you and the Admiral accomplished. All of us have stories. Missions that did not add up, reports that got buried, contractor relationships that should not exist." She held Maya's gaze. "If you are still fighting, we want to fight with you." Maya looked at them, one by one. The exhaustion in their postures, the determination behind the exhaustion, the particular quality of people who had arrived at the same decision she had arrived at 14 months ago, in a corridor lined with portraits of dead admirals. That silence had a cost they were no longer willing to pay. "I am still fighting," she said. 6 months later, in a small office in Alexandria, Virginia, the sign on the door read, "Operation Clear Sight. Veteran Advocacy and Military Contractor Oversight." The walls held photographs. Tran, Rhodes, Okafor. Hargrove in his dress whites, the last time she saw him in uniform. The 14 who had approached her at Arlington, all of whom now worked with her, some full-time, some when their service schedules permitted. Park's flash drive had been duplicated and secured in 3 separate legal archives. The Hargrove protocols were Pentagon policy. The Callaway Whistleblower Protection Act had passed the Senate with 81 votes. 29 policy reforms implemented across 4 military branches. Farrow was in Leavenworth. Cass had taken a plea and received 12 years. The Arctis executives were in federal custody awaiting trial. Not a single service member had died in a covered operation connected to a defense contractor since the story broke. It was not enough. She knew that. It would never be entirely enough because Tran and Rhodes and Okafor were still dead, and 8 other Americans killed in Somalia and Djibouti were still dead, and their families still woke up every morning in a world those people were no longer in. No verdict and no policy and no office with a sign on the door changed that fact. She had stopped expecting it to. What she expected now was the work. Just the work, every day, the same way she had expected the mission every day when she was operating. You showed up. You did what the situation required. You kept going. Her phone rang. She recognized the number. Carla Diaz, FBI. "Callaway. We have a situation developing," Diaz said. "Army Ranger Sergeant out of Fort Liberty reporting anomalous drone activity during a patrol rotation in northern Iraq. Intel package that contradicts everything his team observed on the ground. And the contractor name in the operational support documents that I need you to look at." Maya was already pulling up a blank case file on her screen. "Send me everything." The file arrived while Diaz was still talking. Maya opened it. Scanned the contractor name. Did not recognize it, which meant it was new, which meant someone had looked at what happened to Arctis Systems and decided to rebuild the same machine under a different name, with better insulation between the money and the bodies. She felt the shrapnel shift in her ribs, the familiar ache, cold morning, metal against tissue. 3 permanent reminders of what happened when the machine was left running unchecked. Tran, Rhodes, Okafor. Still with her. Still the reason. "I need the full drone flight logs and the contractor's DoD contract history going back 3 years, she said. "And I need the sergeant's contact information. I want to talk to him directly before anyone else does." "Already pulling it," Diaz said. Maya leaned forward over her desk and got to work. The scars beneath the metal would never heal. The 3 fragments lodged against her heart would never be removed. Every cold morning for the rest of her life, she would feel them shift and burn and press against the wall of tissue that kept her alive. And every cold morning for the rest of her life, she would get up anyway, because the dead did not get cold mornings, and the ones who did owed it to the ones who did not to spend them on something that mattered. She had made a promise to a dying man in a hospital room in December. She intended to keep it for as long as she was breathing. The truth mattered. She was going to make sure the whole world knew it.